Arsenal are top of the league and top of their Champions League group, but a lot of fans haven't been that happy this season because something's just not clicked at Arsenal, and versus Lens it felt like it did. And we're going to break down exactly what was different about the Lens game, why did it potentially click versus Lens. We're going to talk about the Havertz role, we're going to talk about the game, we're going to talk about a few tactical tweaks and break down what's really setting Arsenal back in terms of attack. Offensively, it's known that they've been solid, but what has been the trouble in terms of attack? So Arsenal's biggest problem this season has been creating chances. They ranked 10th in the Premier League for non-penalty XG. To put that into context, I'm a Man United fan. Man United create absolutely nothing, but we've got a higher XG than Arsenal when it comes to non-penalty this season. But what saved Arsenal was how good their defence has been. There's not been a better defence than Arsenal's in the league. I think the least line-breaking passes have been played against Arsenal due to Declan Rice being this interception monster. I think Arsenal have conceded the least goals. They're just absolutely phenomenal. Gabriel Jesus, Declan Rice, that core, that Arsenal defence is very solid, but it's the creating chances, it's the going forward, where last season we saw this free-flowing, beautiful football Arsenal, and this season something doesn't seem right. But versus Lens, every single question mark people had about Arsenal, Havertz, what has he been signed? What's Havertz's role? What's Artets seeing Havertz? Why aren't Arsenal playing this free-flowing football? Well, they did that versus Lens. You could see the Havertz role. You could see what they wanted from Havertz. You could see things like Odegaard being used. The attack was fluid. But why was that different? What was the key difference? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. So do hit that like button. Of course, subscribe down below if you're new. And let's break it down. So the biggest difference was mostly that Lens tried to go toe-to-toe with Arsenal. Arsenal have been playing against the low block, and they're struggling to break down the low block because they don't have that left centre mid profile that's good in build-up. So they're going long because Havertz is good at making runs off the ball. That's probably the best way to explain it. But because Lens were going toe-to-toe with Arsenal, it meant that Arsenal could hit them on the transition. When you've got players like Havertz that's really good making those balls off the run, that is an aerial threat, it worked really well. And Havertz was a key part to why Arsenal worked so in the transition. So with the wingers, Martinelli and Saka, it was like Robin and River at times. And you can see that if a team gives Arsenal space, they try and go toe-to-toe versus Arsenal. Arsenal obliterate them. And this is exactly why I think Arsenal might be in a better position this season, because I think their ability against teams that leave them space, the big teams, it's going to be the big teams that leave them space, actually means they can compete with the big teams, but they just might struggle versus the small teams, which we're going to talk about how Arteta can solve that problem. So we're going to do a quick analysis of the game, of the goals, of the chances, and I'm pretty sure this wasn't a goal. I think the Havertz missed here, but I wanted to point out before I get into anything how good Tomiyasu was and how important Tomiyasu's role was yesterday for Arteta. Tomiyasu was making so many overlaps, and he did this overlap and he put a good cross into Havertz a couple of minutes into the game. Havertz headed it and he missed just wide. Tomiyasu obviously got a brilliant assist, the ball in from deep, the switcher played to Martinelli, and what a fantastic goal that led to as well. And then we saw at other times for the Odegaard goal, Saka did this brilliant run down the pitch, and then Tomiyasu's there for the overlap again to put the crosses in. Tomiyasu with the overlap, Tomiyasu with the crosses getting so far forward, and Tomiyasu with the ability to switch the play was important. But one of the reasons that was important is because Lens gave Arsenal a lot of space so he could make those runs into. And Arsenal are very good in terms of making runs. They're very good at getting into the right areas, but it's about picking out the space, and Lens allowed them to do that, which I think is why they were so good. But another reason they were so good, and I spoke about Martinelli and Saka kind of reminded me of Robin and Ribery, and the reason I say that is because of the space, how they utilised that in transition, and I feel like everything good came through the wingers. Now, if we look at the Martinelli goal, how good he was, the run, the cut inside, it was amazing. And the funny thing is, he had about 3 people to pass to if he wanted to. And for the Saka goal, again, Martinelli went down the side. He had so much space. But if you look at the second picture there, look how many Arsenal players are in the box. So if Martinelli forces a save, which he did, there's Saka, there's Jesus, there's other players that it's likely going to fall to, and it's going to go in. And because of the space, Arsenal could overload the box, and Martinelli exploited that well. Saka absolutely exploited the space so well. But what Saka did that I think a lot of people don't mention is that Saka, his positional awareness was so good. Arsenal didn't score here, but Jesus heads it well, lays it onto Saka. Saka does the overlay onto Martinelli, and Martinelli almost gets it in. But I think Saka's most brilliant moment wasn't his goal, wasn't his assist, it was his run for the 5th goal. Saka takes the ball, he runs down the whole pitch, beating his man, he lays it onto Tomiyasu that crosses it into Odegaard. And the reason Arsenal was so good is because they could utilise the width in this game, they could utilise the overlap, they had the runners, they have players like Havertz that is good running off the ball, they have players like Jesus that's got lots of qualities. I know Jesus was sort of being quoted saying that goal scoring wasn't his best attribute, and Jesus meant that he can score goals, but he's a good striker because he can do all these other things, which we saw. We know Martinelli and Saka can make runs, and if you give Arsenal space to make the runs in behind you, give them space in behind you, give them space to transition, they are absolutely phenomenal, and they showed that today because they've got the profiles for that. What they don't quite have the profile is that left centre mid in build-up, but in the big games versus Real Madrid or Bayern Munich or Man City, I don't think Arsenal are going to struggle because they're going to be given the space as well. And I think the main difference between other games this season and Lens is that Arsenal are actually given the strength so they can transition. They were given the space. Lens tried to go toe-to-toe with them, and it just caught out Lens. I think Arsenal, I've said this 100 times, his biggest weakness is breaking down the low blocks. So I want to actually talk about Kai Havertz, a player that I've never rated fully, a player that's got a lot of stick. I think some people just give him stick unnecessarily, but there's a reason Arteta brought him, and I kind of want to actually speak about why Arteta brought Havertz. And why I think when Arsenal get that left centre mid in and Havertz inevitably becomes like a second striker, and maybe they get that main striker in like an Osterham or whoever they want, Havertz could be really important for Arsenal. Because why Arsenal brought Havertz is he's a very unique profile. He can play with his back to goal. He's a long ball option. He can make runs in behind. He can hold up the ball quite well. And with the way Arsenal are now, because they're a better team, not only are they coming up against low blocks, but they're coming up against man-to-man presses. And sometimes Arsenal will want to go long because they want to sort of play over the press, and Havertz's sort of height and his profile allows Arsenal to kind of go long. You see that with Man City and Haaland. Obviously Havertz is nothing on Haaland, but it gives Arsenal an outlook to play over the press because they're getting pressed a lot more. And because Havertz can play with his back to goal, he can hold up the ball, he wins his duels pretty well and he makes runs in behind. Havertz is that outlook, and I think when the press is really intense, Havertz gives them another option. But the problem is, because Arsenal have been going along trying to find Havertz playing over the press too much, there's the question of they're not controlling the game, they're not creating enough chances, they haven't been as good as build-up. And that's because I don't think Kai Havertz is a left centre mid unless he can make those box crashing runs, which he did really well, and unless there's a lot of space in transition, which he did really well yesterday. And I think that is the big problem. But I think if Havertz became sort of second striker that was utilised, you could see his role at Arsenal because he offers an outlet. But if he's playing in midfield, you need a player, a left centre mid that's good in build-up. You need probably Partey, Declan Rice, Odegaard would be Arsenal's best midfield three, and then Havertz can sort of alternate with Jesus potentially there as well. But I think you could see Havertz's capacity to win duels, and he can win duels against anyone in the world, which I think is why Arteta wanted him, that kind of physical presence. He's got those long legs, he can win those sort of aerial balls, and he has dominance, which I think Arsenal liked, and I think that stood out today. Now, Havertz hasn't been great, but the last two games, you could see it, and I thought Havertz's all-round game was really, really good yesterday as well. We've seen so far at Arsenal, though, Havertz has got into goal-scoring positions, and sometimes he's just been unlucky. He's not... the finish just hasn't come off for him, or he's not been found. And I've always said with Havertz, if he's getting in those goal-scoring positions and he's missing chances, when the confidence comes, those chances will come. And I don't think Havertz is going to set the world on fire this season and set the world alight. I think Havertz is almost made for when Arsenal bring in those final two profiles that they need in their team. He's kind of a final piece of the puzzle signing. I think Havertz will be more suited to Arsenal once they get those extra two signings in. But I think that Havertz will end the season a lot better than he started, and I think people will start to see potentially his role. Now, again, I think Arsenal's strongest 11 has Partey in there and not Havertz, and I think Havertz drops to the bench. But I think in those big games where Arsenal are going to have the space to transition, we could see Havertz's role. And I think Havertz, a lot of it will be confidence. I've never seen a player sort of trolled so much after joining a team as Havertz, really. I mean, I remember the MLS All-Stars game all over, and that was pre-season, he was being trolled. Now, I do want to talk about Arsenal's problem, and I do want to talk about why Arsenal were good versus Lens and what their problem has been this season. Now, I think Arsenal have been good this season. They're top of the league. I think people speak about Arsenal's problem like it's really bad, but they're top of the league, they're top of the Champions League. But I think where they have struggled is because of Havertz's profile playing left centre mid, and because Havertz is better off the ball than on the ball. He's known for his off-the-ball attributes. Arsenal have avoided build-up in the second phase of the midfield, which could be why they're creating or maybe struggling more against the low blocks. And I think against the lower teams, they're going to need Thomas Partey back and maybe Declan Rice to go more advanced, because Declan Rice is really good at line-breaking passes, and Odegaard to find his form, and I think they can recover from that. But I do generally think that in these big games, Havertz is going to suit it. In the smaller games, I think they will need Thomas Partey's return. Thomas Partey's injury record, I think Douglas Luiz could be a really good transfer for Arsenal in January. So I sort of spoke about Havertz, his runs, why he could be good against the likes of City, Madrid. And I think the way Arsenal played versus Lens when they were allowed space, the way Arsenal played versus Manchester City, it says to me Arsenal can defend well. They are the best defensive team in the world right now. That is an absolute fact. And I'm saying this as a Man United fan. Gabriel, Saliba, Rice, that core is unbelievable. All the stats prove Arsenal the best defensive team in the world. They kept Haaland quiet. They can keep the big teams quiet. But the big question mark has been over, can Arsenal create? Can Arsenal score? And what Arsenal have proven is in those big games where they're allowed space, they can. And I think versus City, I think in the Champions League against those big teams, they're not going to be playing against teams that are going to set up with a low block. And this is why I think Arsenal could really thrive in the Champions League this season, because I think every team's going to give them the space. And I think when Arsenal get the space, you see how good their attack is. You see actually what Havertz's role is. You see how fluid they are. You see how fluid their players. And as a rival, I am a little bit worried that Arsenal could win the Champions League. I think they've got more chance of winning the Champions League than the Premier League, despite them being top of the Premier League, just because of the way the Champions League sets up the competition. They're going to be allowed that space. We see how good Jesus is in Champions League. We see how good Saka's been. But also, one thing that not many people have mentioned is the dynamic between Jesus and Havertz. I saw a little bit of a dynamic sort of developing with them, interchanging. And I also think with this Arsenal team, the fluidity of their attack might also depend on the relationships, when they develop a relationship with each other as well. And I think because they've had a lot of injuries, 1 minute it's Nketiah, 1 minute it's Trossard, 1 minute it's Jesus, all of these players playing number 9, I think once they get sort of system developed more as well and get used to it, and as time goes on, I think they will get better. So that was my review of the Arsenal Lens game in terms of a bit of a breakdown, a tactical breakdown, and what Arsenal's problem is, why they look so much better versus Lens, and the tactical tweak that Arteta could make. Please hit that like button. Of course, subscribe down below if you're new. Hopefully there wasn't too much background noise. I am filming in my office and there's a little bit of noise. See you next time. Bye.